guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm very excited to be talking about today's topic, and that is books I hope to reread this year. So I would say rereading is something that I only have more recently gotten back into the habit of doing. I feel like when I first started my YouTube channel, I felt I had a lot of pressure to only read new books and not really revisit either old faves or first books in a series I maybe have forgotten about. This has definitely changed over the years though. One, I personally love rereading favorite series now. I've reread the entire Mistborn trilogy. I'm obviously going back and rereading the Lightbringer trilogy, and I'm currently in the process of rereading the Stormlight Archives. I find the practice of rereading a lot of fun because one, I forget stuff, let's be honest, but also just kind of re-encountering a favorite story. I feel like I pick up on things I maybe didn't notice the first time, and honestly can be an entirely new experience, which I personally have been finding to be a lot of fun. That being said, I do have a collection of books to chat through today that are kind of a combination of all-time faves I want to revisit, books I want to give a second chance, and just also books that I forgot everything about and want to continue on with the series. So without further ado, let's chat about the books I hope to reread. So first set of books on my list is actually an entire series, and that is the His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman. I would say this is definitely kind of the top of my list in terms of prioritization, and honestly I am following a few people who are currently rereading this series, and it is just getting me so excited to pick it up myself. But this particular trilogy was one I read growing up, and it honestly blew my mind at the time. But honestly, I'm really excited to pick up and reread this series as an adult because I do feel like there is probably a bit of nuance I maybe missed back when I was like 12 or 13 years old when I read it the first time. I just recall this series being one of the first instances of me picking up fiction and kind of making me question everything around me. That being said, this is an incredible fantasy classic. The first one, The Northern Lights or The Golden Compass, follows a young girl who's basically on a mission to save her friend. It has a really whimsical fantasy setting, zeppelins and all sorts of really fun technology kind of woven in, as well as these creatures called daemons, which are kind of like animal companions, and our main character has a polar bear. It's full of antics and adventures and honestly a lot of deeper themes. It's a series I constantly and will always recommend, and I do feel like if I reread it and pick it up, I'm going to continue to love it. So this is definitely a trilogy I hope to get to at some point in the next upcoming months. Speaking of childhood faves I want to revisit, the next series I want to at least start the reread process this year is the Chronicles of Narnia. This series was fundamental to me in a lot of ways growing up. It's one of the first fantasy series I ever encountered. The movies were just excellent. I mean, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, true top cinema, you know? And it was also, for me at least, one of the first series I encountered with kind of disparate tales that were connected with kind of a larger thematic element, and that was something I personally really enjoyed as a kid. I've read a few of the books throughout the series a few times, but it's been since I was a kid since I've actually read the entire thing through, as well as given that I know more about the author, as well as some of the themes that are kind of present throughout the story as an adult that I definitely probably didn't pick up on when I was in the 4th grade. I'm also kind of curious to see how I feel about that as well. Next book series I would love to start the reread process of this year is the Codex Vela by Jim Butcher. This was also something I read growing up and was kind of like the first experience with something, and that for me is epic high fantasy. I had never read a series that was this long, both in like page length as well as book number. This particular series was one that was just an all-time fave when I was in high school. I had friends that read it at the same time, and it was just such a fantastic experience. This is a series that's basically kind of inspired by Roman military and Pokemon, believe it or not, and it basically follows a young boy who sort of is this chosen one trope, kind of pulled from this really small remote town, brought to the capital to begin his education. And in this world, people kind of have elemental companions, but our main character is unable to harness this, and there's this sort of terrible dark force that is threatening the shores of this land. It has a lot of classic fantasy trope setup. I'm a little nervous about this reread because I feel like I might not love it as much now as I did then, considering some of the tropes at play and some of the characterization, and because I didn't love Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files, which I read more recently. So this is really a series I'm just curious about to see if I would enjoy it as much now as I did then. I also am a little nervous about like harming the memory because it's kind of really close to my heart, but yeah, I definitely want to start the reread of the Codex Vela and just see what I think. Next up, I have the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness. This was one of the first book series I ever talked about and reviewed on my booktube channel a million years ago, and I haven't read it since, but this is a book series I feel like I would continue to love. The new movie recently came out, which has really inspired me to kind of take another look at this series and possibly reread it soon, but I just remember the concepts and the writing style of this particular trilogy was just so excellent when I read it at the time, and I've since read a bunch of Patrick Ness books. Patrick Ness is just one of my favorite YA authors, and I have continued to love them to this day, so I have a really strong feeling I'm going to love this just as much when I give this a reread. This is a sci-fi dystopian story where we follow our main character Todd, and he lives in this community that is all men. He's never encountered a woman in his entire life, and in this town you can hear everybody else's thoughts. So there's not a lot of privacy, and there's also a lot of control. One day Todd is kind of going through the forest with his dog Manchi, and he encounters a pocket of silence, and he also encounters a girl. And then from there you follow them as they kind of begin to go on a journey. This is such a wonderfully character-led story. It's very much like a personal as it is a literal based journey, and there's just, I feel like, so much packed in within this particular trilogy, and I again just have a feeling I'm going to love it so much. It's emotional, but it also has great touches of like sci-fi and dystopia and plot twists as well. Patrick Ness is an excellent writer, so this is one I feel like I would love upon a reread, and also just one I continue to recommend to this day. This trilogy, excellent. Next is the only book on my reread TBR that I've already read and didn't love the first time, but I have a really strong feeling that I was very wrong about my initial opinion about this book, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This is the first book to a group of short stories, novellas, that is very beloved and very well received by everyone else. I've also recently read Middle Game by the same author and really enjoyed it, both the characters and the writing style. So again, when I read this book, like I think it was 6 years ago, I thought it was just all right. I have a feeling that upon a reread I would definitely change my mind and opinion, so that is why this is on this list, because the synopsis just sounds incredible. I have no idea what was wrong with me at the time, but this is essentially about a boarding school for children who have encountered some sort of fantastical event. Essentially, all the children who live at this boarding house have all been transported to a fantastical world. They've gone through some doorway, some portal, and they have since come home, and the aftermath of these fantastical adventures have all impacted these children in different ways. And from what I remember, this is a very character-focused, fantastical-based story. I recall really enjoying a lot of the ideas, and now that there's a lot of books out in this series, I feel like it'd be a perfect one to marathon. The idea of this I feel like is really calling out to me, and I love Seanan McGuire's writing, so this is one I want to reread because I just simply think I was wrong the first time. Next up are a variety of books I want to reread so I can continue on with the rest of the series. The first one is The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherine M. Valente. This is an incredibly whimsical middle grade sort of fairy tale story. It is amazing. I read this quite a few years ago and recall loving it so much. It kind of has that classic, very richly detailed writing style, which is something I personally love encountering in middle grade stories. It's just whimsical and kind of timeless in how it's constructed. And this is a multi-book series as well, and I've only read the first one, so I want to reread this to be able to continue on with the rest of the series. But this is one I just feel like I'm going to like so much. Just very imaginative, very colorful, and incredibly transportive. About a girl who kind of runs away to Fairyland and has to go on a variety of quests and adventures to save it. It's weird, but also a bit dark, if I recall correctly, and yeah. But yeah, I just want to give this a reread because I loved it the first time around, and I need to continue on with the rest of the series. Next up is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Of all the books I'm featuring here today, this is definitely the story that I could recite to you from beginning to end. I'm not rereading this because I have forgotten really anything about this book and story. It's really because I love it so much, and I want to continue on with the rest of the series because I've actually only read the first book within this world by this author. Obviously, I love the movie Howl's Moving Castle. It's one of my all-time favorite films. It's my go-to comfort movie. Howl is just a style and personal icon. I love this book so much. This particular story means a lot to me, so this is definitely a reread because I just love it and I want to read it again, and it's been a couple years, which to me is too long since I've picked this book up, but also because I want to inspire myself to continue on with the last couple of books within this series. But if you haven't heard of this. This follows our main character Sophie, who is the eldest daughter of 3 and never really intends to leave home until one day she is cursed by a witch, and the only way to save herself and to break this curse is to seek out the wizard Hal and his moving castle. A bunch of stuff happens from there. It is full of whimsy and magic and love, and it's just amazing. If you haven't seen the movie, watch the movie. If you haven't read the book, read the book. But I hope to read this probably sometime this summer. All-time fave, can't help it, on the list. Next up, I have Crown of Feathers by Nikki Powell Preto. I read this book about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago now, and loved it. Thought this was an excellent first book to a new YA fantasy trilogy, and the 3rd book is planning to come out, I believe, sometime this year. Given that, I feel like it's a perfect time to reread this to be able to marathon the rest of the books. I already own book 2. I'm probably going to pre-order book 3, but yeah, I loved this particular YA installment so much. It's been a couple years, so I really wanted to be kind of fresh of mind as I kind of start my marathon. This YA story is essentially set in a world that was once ruled by fierce phoenix warrior queens, but they have since been overthrown and destroyed, and a new government has been put in place. We follow 2 sisters many years later who have a connection to these warrior queens and are basically working to hatch their own phoenixes to become a part of the legendary Phoenix Riders. However, while they are sisters and they have a close bond, there's also a lot of tension and competition between them, and due to a variety of circumstances, they are separated at the beginning of this book. One girl then goes on to pose as a boy to kind of join the Phoenix Riders themselves, and mixed up and also involved within the POVs of the story is a prince as well. It has great family angst, romantic angst, action, adventure. I really recall loving this particular book so much, and I've only heard excellent things about the 2nd book as well. So this is a YA trilogy I hope to just marathon throughout this year, as I really feel like it might be a new favorite. And then the last book I have to talk about is a little embarrassing because I still haven't reread it or even finished this duology, which is also embarrassing, and that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I've reached the point where I can't just continue on with book 2 because I have forgotten pretty much everything that has happened in book 1, so here we are, hoping to reread it at some point in 2020. But this is a beautiful lyrical fantasy story by Laini Taylor, one of my favorite YA fantasy authors. I feel like she has great skill creating angst and drama and just beautiful imagery. This is a dual perspective story, with one of the perspectives being Laszlo Strange, who is a librarian, kind of amateur historian to the lost city of Weep, which essentially disappeared off the maps 200 years ago. No one has been there, no one has located, no one has met anyone from this city. However, one day an envoy arrives from the lost city of Weep and basically looking for a variety of specialists to come with them to help them solve a problem. Laszlo volunteers to go along, given his vast knowledge of this city, and then from there the story kind of begins to unravel. This is full of romance and generational pain. It's just so heartbreakingly beautiful, and I recall loving it so much. The Lost City of Weep will make you weep. I guarantee it. I want to reread this maybe in the fall and also continue on with the 2nd book within this duology and kind of wrap this series up finally, as I have been meaning to reread this and finish it for years at this point. Alrighty guys, those are the books I hope to reread this year. Please let me know down below some books or book series you hope to get back to, as I would love to know. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!